really fun. The question of the day is, I always wanted to blank. So throw in whatever answers you want, but something you always wanted to do personally or professionally. Oh, wow, these are amazing. Be a backup singer. Cool, Sharon. We're giving everybody just a second to get on, but if you're just joining us, welcome to the Friday Animal Welfare Leadership Roundup call. If you are new to these calls, please let us know who you are and where you're from. July, we had a record registration for 2021 with more than 1,300 people registering for this call. So we are only growing, and we have a really great lineup for today. So just giving folks a second to hop on and we'll get started. Okay, and if you're just joining us, the prompt for today is I always wanted to. So live on a ranch, that's a good one. Write a children's book with my mother as the illustrator. Okay, so everyone, part 2 of this is we all have to go do these things, I think. Cool. Okay, well, welcome everybody to the Friday Animal Welfare Leadership Roundup call. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Kristen Hassan. I'm with American Pets Alive and get to help facilitate these calls along with the amazing folks at Maddie's Fund. So before we start into today's packed agenda, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Smith from Maddie's Fund.
Good morning, everybody. It's so amazing when I get on these calls, there's like 1 or 2 people on, and then it's like within minutes, there are over 100 of you who join us. And it is just so, I can't begin to tell you how much you all have done to get me through the last 18 months. It really would not have been possible with so much joy and happiness and laughter and incredible information. And today, some of my most favorite people are going to be talking to us today. Amy Sadler said this morning that her son probably has encountered more dogs than any one person ever on the planet. And that's saying a lot coming from Amy. And Shelley and Joe are going to talk to us about this incredible solution that they have come up with for South Carolina. I tell you, you guys are rock stars. And Mike Wheeler, my most favorite person from Arkansas, who is also the only person from Arkansas that I know besides Brandy. Don't worry, Brandy, I'm not leaving you out. But Mike is going to tell us about this most innovative solution, idea, project. I mean, when you guys hear what Mike has been able to do in Cabot, Arkansas, you're going to say, why didn't we think about that? Because he really is taking something and turning it into, I think, the kind of project and program that we all should be doing in our communities. So with further, I just have one more thing I want to say. Allison, I have you in my head. The question of the week on the forum is, what changes has your organization made to be more inclusive? If you want to be part of the forum and want to answer that question, Allison has put the link in the chat file. Please go to it and give us your response. We always love hearing from you. And diversity, equity, inclusion, even though we haven't necessarily talked about it in a couple weeks, it's really something that's front and center for all of us as we try to figure out how do we do the things that we do in a different way that will help us change the face of animal welfare. So without any more words, I want to turn it back to Kristen and this great agenda for today. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you so much, Mary. Before we get started, we just want to give a little bit of room to any of the national organizations who are on the call today who have announcements for the entire group. So this is your time. We only have a few minutes for this today, so just jump right in and let us know your announcement.
Maddie's Fund has launched a challenge with, there's 15, it's actually not just Maddie's Fund, it's 15 collaborating partners, the Open Arms Challenge. Check it out. Registration and applications are the last week of this month, August 23rd.
Petco Love has the Animal Welfare Organization grant cycle open now. It's open for about 2 more weeks. It closes August 31st. So this is our largest grant cycle of the year. So you want to apply in it. We also have a Data Saves Lives cycle open now with the intention of getting software to underfunded organizations that resources are a barrier to having a sophisticated software. I'll put the link in the chat. Thanks, y'all.
Humane Canada's Violence Link Conference is coming up in November, and there's a flash sale on until August 19th. I'll put a link in the chat.
Hey guys, the Best Friends Rachel Ray Foundation Save Them All and No Kill Excellence grant cycle is currently open through the end of the month, and I will also put a link in the chat.
I'm a PhD student at the Ontario Vet College, and I have a survey open for foster parents. And I can put a chat in or a link in the chat for the if any shelters with foster programs with kittens want to send it out to their foster parents. Thank you.
Awesome. When do you need that back? When are you
this one? Yeah, this one we're closing next Thursday, and then I have another one opening on Friday that will be a community science project with foster parents as well. So I can come back next Friday if possible and share that link as well.
That'd be great. Okay, great. Well, so we are going to go ahead and get started with Joe Elmore and Shelly Simmons are here. They did something this past week that was really remarkable and a fascinating approach to this current problem that we're seeing, which is widespread of shelters being dangerously over capacity. So Joe and Shelly, I want to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about what the state of South Carolina is doing to address this.
I will let Joe start up.
Thanks, Shelly. Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Mary. It's good to see everybody. So like all of you, we use the word crisis quite a bit, not crying wolf. I don't think any of us cry wolf, no pun intended, I suppose, but it's, we're looking at something a little bit different and similar to the Gulf states last year, it's the perfect storm. Again, another pun to throw in there with the end of summer slowdown in adoptions, the pandemic rebound, so to speak, and then the peak of hurricane season down here in the southeast. So we're looking at all of that, and of course, the whole point is to get attention from the public, especially with the controversies regarding the pandemic and and going back to school and mask or no mask and all of that. So how do we get attention without crying wolf? And we decided to move away from the crisis term because that's been used a lot. And for all of us, and we work closely together here in this network through No Kill South Carolina to declare a state of emergency. The public knows what that means, a state of emergency. The public's been dealing with this for a year and a half now or so. And Shelly, Greenville County Animal Care is on the opposite end of the state. And we're down here on the coast. So, literally from the coast to the mountains, we're basically coming out with the same message, and everywhere in between. They're about, the largest city in South Carolina is 130,000. So it's really a state of small to medium-sized communities, but a variety of media markets. So there's not like one large media market. So when we go out, we have to go to 7 media markets, with about 3 of those being in our neighboring states of North Carolina and Georgia to really get that consistent message across the entire state. And so far, I would say in the first 24 hours, we've had good response from the media thus far. Shelley?
Yeah, so, I think one of the things that is important is, or kind of helps spur this interest statewide is the relationship that the No Kill South Carolina shelters have. Most, I think almost all of the open admission shelters participate in No Kill South Carolina. And then, we had this emergency meeting, and within one day we were able to put this together. I say we, but it was very much No Kill South Carolina that, did all the hard work. But, so all of the shelters came together and decided, yes, we need one unified message that we, are in a state of emergency. And what does that mean? And it's more than just, come adopt and rescue, although that is really important, and foster. But what does that mean? And so the message that went out really is, we need your help as, community statewide, adopt, foster, rescue, how businesses can get involved, and citizens, don't bring animals in, don't call animal control unless it's absolutely necessary, unless the animal's in danger or, a person is in danger. And so that's the message that's been going out. And, I was talking with a group of people yesterday, and there was some concern that I kept hearing over and over again that the people within their community they thought, or they think that the reason why their shelter is overcrowded must have something to do with the way that shelter is operating. And they must be doing something wrong. And so what I like about this statewide message is that it's saying, no, this is no one shelter in South Carolina or even nationwide that is struggling here, or we're not doing something wrong. We're in a crisis. This is what's going on. It happens every year, but this year is unique. And so that was what I really liked about this message. And I hope that resonates with all of our communities, because, if they can see that this is not something where shelters are doing things wrong, I'm hoping that will spur more interest to get involved and, have a personal connection with your local shelter wherever you are across South Carolina.
So we attached the news release. Let's see, there's a copy of the news. How did you get everyone together? Like because we were like, first of all, can any of us can we steal this idea if we're in a state that's also in a state of emergency? And if we want to, how do we get everyone together? Like, is it because you had a coalition established that you were able to do this quickly?
Yeah, Kristen, it's we have a coalition established, and we've been working together through No Kill South Carolina as a coalition, and we have benefited from the relationships. I can't tell you how many projects. We do an annual adoption event each year. I think we've done it 4 years in a row with all of us participating, and we chose the dates on this so that it would roll into the national Clear the Shelters campaign that would take us through about mid to late September. So we're just really wanting to jumpstart this, but specifically to your question, we have a coalition in place, and we don't pull together emergency calls unless we really have a bona fide emergency. And I think Shelley, correct me, and Abby, correct me if I'm mistaken. It's I believe it was we pulled it all together in a 30-minute phone call, and then started working on it. I think kind of to Shelley's point too, is the message going out is that it's everybody's issue. And we made some similarities to COVID with the with the overcrowding crisis, and that COVID is not just a hospital crisis. I mean, we all get that. We all understand that this is a community crisis. Everybody's got a role to play. Same with here, to underscore Shelley's point, is that it's not just a shelter issue or crisis. And so in addition to adopting or fostering, we're calling out businesses, veterinarians, rescue groups, shelters and animal controls, and giving specific tactics that any of them can take part in. And Shelley also made the point that, doing it this way could provide some leverage to some of the shelters whose higher ups are reluctant to do things like managed moratoriums on intake and those types of things.
There's a question in the chat. Are the police and sheriff's orgs involved in this? And I guess along with that, did anybody really push back on this that you had to address?
Right.
No.
Shelley, you want to take that one?
Sure. I'm not, if you're speaking to police and sheriff organizations that have animal control, yes. Pretty much the group that came together was primarily municipal shelters or nonprofit shelters with government contracts. So, that was the core group of people that got together. And like Joe said, we put it together in like 30 minutes, how this was going to work. But if it's municipal shelters, we're calling out to animal control agencies all across the state to do moratoriums, to only pick up animals that are in need. And I really do hope that encourages more shelters to do that across our state, because I know Joe, they've been doing it down in Charleston for a while. We've been doing it up in Greenville, and we are a government agency, and we have been able to successfully do that by communicating closely with all of our animal control agencies throughout the county that we have contracts with.
I think that this is not, I think someone in the chat is sort of asking about, is this closing the shelters, quote, closing the shelters? And that was not the understanding I got from reading the news release. What does it actually mean to declare a state of emergency? And we have about 2 minutes left. So that question seems important to answer.
Hey,
Well,
hey,
ahead,
Joe,
Shelley.
it's Catherine from the association.
Oh, hey.
I am just full disclosure going to tell you, when I got Bobby Mann's email yesterday, I thought, holy crap, the state of South Carolina is in a state of emergency and that we all need to pivot and send resources and help. And so I wrote Bobby this email, and I'm like, this message really freaked me out, because, for so many shelters who are first responders, and I was just curious, what kind of response, or has there been any confusion? Like the Emergency Management Division of South Carolina, how have you all been able to sort of differentiate it? Because that to me was confusing, and I thought I would just ask you directly.
Sure. We work very closely with the emergency management at the state level, as well as local levels. And I think that, one of the things is we co-branded the release, No Kill South Carolina, which is the coalition, so to speak, along with South Carolina Animal Care and Control Association, which Shelley is the president of. Just in terms of, what does it mean? It's not a threat, and all of us, I think, are in agreement that we really don't want to threaten you. People with euthanasia of animals, and we didn't in this. We're being transparent. We are in a bad situation, and to get the focus, and we all know here on the call that there's just so much is in the news right now about the pandemic resurgence and strategies and tactics around that. And Catherine, better than anyone, it's all about getting attention on our issue, which is a dire issue. And we did want, but we've used crisis several times throughout the year and throughout the pandemic. Certainly during summer, I'd be willing to bet, the folks on this call, perhaps 90% of the folks on this call have used crisis during the summer, and we wanted to do something different than crisis. And like Shelley mentioned earlier, I mean, we all came together on an emergency phone call on Wednesday morning, but we were already in touch. We stay in touch with each other all the time. We do things like collective transports, and we actually prioritize the transports. Like, for example, I mean, Shelley's one end of the state and manages the largest shelter in the state. We, on the other hand, are down here on the coast and manage a large shelter for our state, but we have more flexibility in terms of vehicles and getting animals from point A to point B. And so we actually already work very closely together, and, you know, where are the fires in our state, and trying to prioritize those animals to get out on transport. So back to Kristen's question, it's pulling this together. It's not hard because we've established that coalition.
You know what, I think that what you just shared, Joe, I think is super critical. You all have a working coalition and relationships that are already built within your state that enabled you to get on a phone call and in 30 minutes, you know, figure this out. Whereas, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, when Kristen made the point earlier, or she asked the question, is this something that other states can do? You know, my concern is other states don't have the infrastructure that you and Shelley and South Carolina have pulled together. And so I'm just, you know, my concern was, I don't know that other states will be able to take the same approach without having some confusion. So I really appreciate that you sort of clarified that you have that relationship. So, and I know that, you know, we've had some questions from some other people who are concerned about, you know, how do you do something like this and, you know, be able to transfer it or scale it to the rest of the nation. And I think it just speaks to that level of communication. But I do still think it's confusing to the public a little bit with the state of emergency. So I thought, I'm just going to tell you.
Well, I appreciate that. And I want to say, Joe and Shelley, you all are such models for collaborative work and for leading an entire state. You really are heroes. And I do think these communications are difficult and challenging. And just as Catherine's mentioning, they can be confusing. And I think we're dipping our toe in the water on how to speak differently to the community and talk about the collective responsibility towards homeless pets. And what was really exciting about your news release is if you read it, it really talks about that collective responsibility and how everyone has to be part of the solution. And I think that is the right messaging, that we're all in this together and the shelters can't do it alone. Joe and Shelley, we are 2 minutes over time, but is there any last thought you want to make sure you get in there before we move on to Amy?
Just one is that, I mean, it is a campaign. So we've built this campaign around $50,000. We feel like we'll raise that. And so it's not just, you know, pushing out the press release. Had that been the case, we have some other tactics that we might pull together, such as press conference and those types of things, depending on how, you know, what we experience over the weekend. But it definitely is an advertising campaign. We're not looking at this as just solely earned media. And so we feel like it will be successful for us.
Shelley, anything from you?
Well, I just put it in the chat. I just wanted to be clear that, you know, we're not asking, you know, the message is not for government shelters to close their doors. The message that we are asking, in addition to what Joe said, is that, you know, there are ways that the community can think first and make smart decisions about what to do when they find lost pets, or, you know, how they can rehome their animal without having to bring it into the shelter. That's the conversation, not close your doors, don't let animals through them.
Yeah, and this really does link back to our blog last week of 37 things you could do if you find to help get more lost pets home. So I don't know if we want to reshare that, but it's this spirit of we need to do more to actually get pets reunited, to help people rehome them, to help people keep them when they want to. We can and must do more now, given the state of animal welfare. And a whopping 92% of Americans who believe that their pets are family members. So thank you, Shelley and Joe, so much. And we hope you'll come back and give us an update about the impact of this campaign.
Thank you. Thanks, Kristen.
Okay, so I can see we have a big crowd today because we got a big important person here who is Amy Sadler, who arguably has done more to help more dogs in shelters than certainly anyone in the country, or as much as. And Amy is needs no introduction, but I've been lucky enough to work with her for about the last 8 years and implement DPFL at 3 different shelters. And I'm just so grateful for all the work she's done to shine a light on the ways that we're caring for dogs and what we need to do, how we need to do better by the dogs that come into our care. So Amy, welcome to the call. We're so happy to have you here today.
Well, be careful what you wish for, because now I'm going to be on all the calls. Now that I'm like in here, I'm like, oh, I can go to all of these. This is so exciting. So thanks for having me.
We're here to talk about something sort of specific today because we had a conversation with Heather Lewis a couple of weeks ago, which we're continuing today, about the future of what our organizations need to look like. And these are really important questions because dog housing is not adequate in most cases, and we need to make a lot of changes, but sometimes knowing what those changes should be beyond, quote, build a play yard. I think you've taught us all that. I guess I want to start with, like, what's some of the worst things that you see regularly? What are some of the things you'd like to see happening in shelters in terms of dog housing, movement, and enrichment?
I was excited to hear that Heather was on here too, because Heather and I struggled through one of these builds together back at the Longmont Humane Society way back when, and we were implementing some crazy out of the box stuff at that time. So I would say, generally speaking, and she knows how to do it so well, is that I think the biggest thing is just the level of stimulation for the dogs. So simple things like dogs facing each other and dogs having to walk past all the kennels is just such a huge source of so many behavior problems and potential danger for handlers, which causes obstacles for the dogs and leads to misdiagnosis of behavior. And it's not a simple thing when you're building a building that you're trying to house a certain number of animals efficiently and effectively. But from a dog behavioral perspective, and what's going to help that environment not be so hard on them and not have them reveal a very different side of themselves than who they would be not in that environment, it so much revolves around that level of stimulation of the dogs on leash and walking by barriers. And I don't know what we can do about this, but dogs barking, if you understand what that's about behaviorally, it's an alerting system. They're trying to tell the other pack members, hey, something is up. And so when they're in an environment where one or the other is constantly being stimulated to bark, it's like us living in a building with the fire alarm going off all the time. And just the level of stress and that causes, I think there's some things that feel to me, I don't have the creative mind to know how do we do that in a building. I just know behaviorally what I would like to see change. And then something doesn't relate to buildings is just, and we're going to be talking about this more and more, is literally just basic leash handling skills. I know that sounds so simple, but if I had a magic wand, if there was really one thing I could do at this stage of my life and career, if I could just wave a magic wand and prevent people from ever holding a tight leash and creating tension, that's my new thing. If everybody now believes play groups and play yards and all that, now our next thing is we're going to teach people not to hold on to a tight leash. If it kills me, we're going to get there.
What do you think? So we all struggle with medium and large dogs in shelters, yet we're housing them in solitary confinement for the most part. Can you and I have talked about this before, but I'm wondering where your thinking is on co-housing dogs that can be co-housed versus housing them in single kennels, even if those kennels are not giant.
Sure. No, I'm a huge believer in co-housing, and we've been talking about it forever, ever since we've been teaching playgroups, and that we would co-house dogs for quality of life, not because we have a shortage of space, so we have to start doubling up in kennels, right? So obviously, and playgroups is supposed to be a huge contributor to finding dogs, letting dogs choose each other, show you which dogs they gravitate to, so that when you transfer them into a kennel together, they've already shown that they have some attraction to one another and they seem to choose each other. So a better way to find those roommates. The other thing that I think can be really beneficial about co-housing dogs is, some dogs have a PR problem. It's harder for them. They have more obstacles for placement, certain types of dogs, blocky-headed dogs, whatever it might be. And, if you have dogs that people have hesitation about, and they're co-housed with a little cute and fluffy, right? It could be a great advertising tool for the ones that that people make assumptions about. So I think there are so many benefits to co-housing, but I think like everything, you've got to look at the individual dogs and let them show you, is this actually working for them, rather than having a prophylactic, systematic way, we house 2 dogs in every kennel or so on and so forth. There's got to be some flexibility. And I think one of the most exciting things I would like to see in kennel designs too are, visual barrier, like panels, or, oh my gosh, what am I thinking? Kristen, you could probably help me. Like a panel that could be put on a kennel but taken off very easily. So you could create visual barriers or take visual barriers off, and they obviously could be sanitized well, and just make a kennel space a little bit more flexible. Even have side to side guillotines, not just so that if a couple of dogs that are side by side, you can separate them for feeding, but then open the guillotines, and then that becomes a space that can the dogs can commingle if they're appropriate. Things like that, flexibility in the individual kennel, so you take away the stimulation and the isolation.
Do you think that we need to design, I saw a shelter recently where the dog housing was built almost more like zoo housing.
Mhm.
Do you think in general we need to start designing with more space? The level of confinement seems really intense with kind of the standard kennel design.
Mhm. Sure. I think, it's really interesting. When I foster dogs at home, I try to foster as many together as I possibly can. And the biggest trouble with that is feeding, right? That's where we get into trouble, is like, oh, how are we going to, if we have 10 dogs in an enclosure, how are we going to feed them safely? And again, it's going to reveal to you which ones have dog-to-dog resource guarding issues. But it is interesting how I'm always working to getting my dogs out of free feeding systems so that the kibble's there and they can graze and they can establish the order of eating together. And to me, it's the healthiest balance as far as dogs cohabitating and living in groups. And it's amazing, whenever I've done that, the heavy ones thin down, the thin ones fatten up, and it balances out, because it's mimicking what would be naturally happening. There's a source of food and everybody's got to figure out and share it, and then leave it, and then eat it when you're hungry again. So that can be tricky though. So if we're going to create large housing, then what are our feeding opportunities? And that's what creates the obstacle there for most people.
If you have burning questions for Amy about big dogs and related to how we handle, house, provide exercise and enrichment for them, you can put them in the chat. I have just a couple of more I think are relevant to this group. When this is a time of year when big dogs are stuck, and this is you're no stranger to this issue. What would you like to see shelters do differently in the spring and summer, either on the outcomes end or in the care end when things are getting packed? What would you like to see change?
I think we've already touched upon it. I think the flexibility of co-housing dogs and getting all the dogs out to play groups. Sometimes, we call it our every dog, every day enrichment model, and people misunderstand that to mean that we are insisting that every dog goes to play group. And that's not, it's that every dog gets out of kennel enrichment. Play groups just happen to be the most efficient way, if you've got 200 dogs on the ground, to get that done without individual walks. But I think, so to me, it doesn't feel, I've not had the experience of attending to the dogs becomes a seasonal problem, other than if you don't have outdoor spaces that account for inclement weather. Like if you've built play yards and you're in the desert, gotta put the shades up. I mean, it's crazy how many seminars we do when we show up, and yes, the yards have been built, but there's no shade, and it feels like for a big chunk of the middle of the day, it's a hazard to be outside in those yards. So you've got to budget for that as well. So make sure that your outside spaces are usable in all different kinds of weather. I think that's the only thing that I could say really as far as seasonally, because seasonally doesn't pertain to large dogs or not. I mean, they're going through what they're going through all year long. You got to get them out of the kennel. That's the bottom line. Get them out of the kennel as much as you possibly can.
Heather Lewis is asking a really important question, which is the pathway between the kennel and the play yard is a place where a lot of problems happen. Have you seen, are there handling things that we can change, and are there design things we need to change to address that?
So, I mean, Heather, when we built Longmont and Mainside, that was the whole point, is to have the fronts of the kennels where the dogs were attracted, so that people that were viewing them, they were seeing the fronts of the dogs, not the butts of the dogs, right? But we wanted the rear of the kennels to be a very low stimulation pathway, so the dogs didn't have to fight with each other on their way out. I still think conceptually it was a challenge to get done. I still think that's conceptually what to do. I mean, if there's if the viewing is happening all on the outside, if you had a play yard that was somehow in the middle, but that the interior of the kennels were visually blocked so that those dogs aren't watching the dogs in the play yards, they get to be on the outside watching people and people watching them while the dogs are playing over here, but nobody's watching that from the kennels. I mean, it's really just a visual access and walking by low stimulation.
Do you, I
I'm
can't
sorry,
remember.
Kristen, can I say one thing about that?
Yeah.
One of the biggest disasters is when I've seen play yards built in the interior where all the kennels are around, but the dogs are all around staring and yelling. You know, it would be if you could push the dogs to the outside. That's the key to that. So I do not want people to walk away thinking, oh, we're going to build our play yards in the center of all the kennels. That could be the exact opposite of what you would want to do.
I see this all the time. And when you see dogs in those kennels, it almost increases it, or in those play yards, it can increase their stress level.
Mm-hmm.
And those yards really are more appropriate for like a one dog visit with a person, right? If that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, do you still see shelters that don't have play yards? Like, is that still even in existence, or does everybody at this point, thanks to you and your last decade work, have a play yard now?
I mean, it is so much more common. I do have to say, I think the play group train is down the tracks, right? I think people have heard me say this before, if DPFL, stopped existing, I think that's done. And I think you're right. I think everybody knows that play yards and play groups are beneficial to dogs. Sometimes there are shelters that it's usually a resource problem. It's really funny. Some shelters that didn't conceptually even like the idea of play groups, the shelter was originally built with yards to throw the dogs out in. So it's very funny how sometimes they were there even if they weren't being used. But now, if they're not there, it's typically a resource issue.
Okay, I want to switch over to a topic because I'm hoping we can have you back to talk more about this, but Dr. Sagerson recently did a presentation about the impacts of trauma on dogs. And I know in your work now, you're dealing with dogs that have arguably experienced trauma. Are you sort of going in that same direction of considering the trauma the dogs may have lived through? And are there things that we need to be doing within our shelters to not be creating additional trauma that's going to impact the dogs negatively in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the reason for our work, is that as sensitively as I can say to all of us, me included, is that kennels drive dogs crazy, period. I would say it that kind of bluntly and in layman's terms. And I think that in the name of us wanting to help them and save them, their experience might still be pretty rough in our care, even when we know that we're trying to do our best by them. And so I think that, we've been talking about for a long time that if we focus on quality of life, life-saving will come with that. And so if we're really focusing more on what's happening to the dogs in our care, I just think that we're going to get farther faster. So for us, the dogs with they're at risk of euthanasia because of behavior issues, right? And so we're working with a whole bunch of those. And all I can say is that if only the dogs could come to us before they had the rap sheet, I think the biggest thing I'd like to say is if we could all collaborate and work together and really identify where we might not be meeting the needs of the animals in our care, and finding someone that we can work with that can fill in that gap, because none of us can be great at all the pieces. So I think that's the biggest thing. I think some dogs are being held on to in environments that cannot meet their needs, and we're losing them. And I just think we have to really be able to, at least internally, start saying that loudly and proudly in a way, which means like own it, name it, and then what can we do about it together? It's something that's going wrong, but for all the right reasons. But I think we just have to, I think collaboration is the key. If I have dogs in our care where I know that there's other programs that this dog actually would suit, that like the ASPCA's program, for example, at their behavior rehabilitation center, we just called them about a very fearful dog that we have that we can work with, but that's what their program is for. So we feel like he will thrive and be able to progress better, faster, sooner in their program that is designed for exactly what he's going through.
There has been almost a doubling down on the tendency of shelters to hire behaviorists, with that term meaning virtually nothing. Although the idea then is that the behaviorist is behaviorally modifying dogs, but we see this play out in negative ways as much as positive. Where are you at with the idea of hiring folks to just do enrichment and play groups versus hiring shelter behaviorists?
So I love how you feed me these questions. You're so perfect, right? So because I mean, we've been doing presentations the last couple of years about knowing the difference between enrichment program, training programming, and behavior programming. And let's call a spade a spade. I mean, if all shelters, if you did this in tiers, if you've really accomplished that, what we call an every dog, every day model, right? Every dog is getting really adequate out of kennel enrichment, ideally at least twice a day, right? Then you're ready to look at, let's develop a basic training program where we can implement, basic manners, having dogs come in and out of kennels politely and teaching them how to walk on leash politely, just the basic stuff, right? Then you tackle that. Then when you've got that going on, that's when you should start looking at what kind of behavior issues do we now feel like we're ready to help resolve. And to me, a lot of behavior departments are really just glorified enrichment departments. And I am all for pharmaceutical support for the dogs as well. But that's supposed to work in conjunction with training and behavior modification, right? So we identify this dog is not able to process under these circumstances. So we want to get some stuff on board to help them so that when we're training them, they can actually respond to it. But we don't want to be just maintaining the dogs in our environment on medications. So we have to be a little bit more astute about understanding the differences there and the nuances there. And as far as shelters really hiring behaviorists, I mean, literally hiring behaviorists like Dr. Sergeson, right? I don't know how many actually have the resources to hire a legitimate behaviorist. I mean, they are experts in the level of qualification and the cost to have one. It's not realistic for shelters. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, I think naming what we're hiring for is critical. It's a shift that needs to happen now because it almost imbues this. I know when this dog should be euthanized or not. And it really almost kind of makes this God complex idea worse. It's like setting people up for that. So in shelters, I think that we have to be, I mean, I think what I've learned from you is that we have to be really clear about what we want our behavior folks to be doing. And you think it starts really from the ground up of providing basic emotional, physical care exercise. Is that right?
Yeah, we have to fulfill them, satisfy them first, right? So that they're not, because that's how play groups really got started. Many of you have heard me say this, so I'm not going to belabor it, but I was a single trainer going into a kennel of 36 dogs and they were all going nuts. And I had a couple of hours. So how am I going to decide? So the point was I was comfortable with play groups, get them all out, satisfy them all, get all their yayas out. And then I could see which ones were still needing help. But if you enrich everybody first, they're pretty happy. It is amazing how some of the dogs can go back and take a nap in the middle of the day. And you can tell when dogs' needs aren't being met because they can never settle. And there was just, there's research coming out about that all the time.
Can I raise a hand here and just say, Amy, thank you so much for saying that. Please say it 100 times over, because I tell you, so many behavioral problems come down to good communication. Are we actually approaching the dogs in canine intuitive ways as opposed to just being so human? We're talking about different species here. Yeah. And so thank you for saying what you're saying. And the other thing too, is I'm always telling people is that in order for a dog to give us what we want, a quiet dog, a relaxed dog, a dog who's focused on us, we have to provide for their needs first. And that's their needs for socialization with other dogs and us honoring their social cues and not setting them up inadvertently for failure by, like, as Amy said, walking other dogs in front of them, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you, Amy.
Sure, thank you for that. And, when I am fostering now, I tell everybody all the time, I don't train dogs when I'm home. I'm a lazy trainer. I just want to hang out. I want the dogs to I want them to be as low maintenance as possible. We just get to hang together. So it doesn't become a focus on training. And there's something else Lynn said that I was going to respond to. Oh, this year I actually am submitting for presentations at the big national conferences about, I think we're going to talk it for dogs' sake, stop doing that. And really wanting to drill into human handling that is actually screwing up the dog's responses. So we're actually creating some of these behavioral problems in the way we are handling them and then labeling them and saying they have a problem so we're really going to talk a lot about human handling.
Okay, Amy, we have like 2 more minutes left. I just want to get to 2 more questions. One is, what is going to look different in 5 years for dogs in shelters?
Well, I mean, I think you're all working so hard to have less animals in the shelters and all this community programming so that they'll be bouncing around in home environments. And I think what's going to be different is I think that our shelters aren't going to be the adoption centers, you know, that they are now, that they're going to end up being the behavior centers. That's what I think. I don't know if you're going to like that answer, but I think that's where we're heading. And we all better get ready for the dogs that we are going to have in our brick and mortar shelters. If you guys all get done everything that you're striving so hard to get done, which thank you for doing what you're doing.
And is there anything else you want to, we're absolutely going to have you come back and continue to, I'm getting private chats saying we need to keep talking about this. So we're going to have you back to continue this conversation if you'll come. And is there anything else today though, that you want to make sure that you share with this group?
I think my biggest thing that I hope we can all hear each other on, and this is for me included, if a dog or an animal is not thriving in our care, let's look around and see who has the programming that can meet their needs. And let's start just redistributing the animals and getting them where their needs can be met, period. And be more DEI in our attitude about that, right? So be inclusive as far as other programming. And if it fits your ideals or not, let's look at what's actually happening for the animals.
Thank you so much. And oh my gosh, thank you for being here, Amy. It's so exciting to see you. And now we're excited to have you keep coming. And
yeah, you're stuck with me now.
we have a good time, I think. So first of all, for those of you that are talking, I want to say that if you feel cut off, I apologize. There's so much to get to that I get a little bit anxious about getting there, but really appreciate everybody chiming in both in chat and in person. That's the whole point of these calls. So thank you. We do have a couple other folks on this call, and I want to turn briefly to Heather Lewis. Heather was with us a couple weeks ago and was really here to talk about the future of shelter design. But Heather, as we're talking specifically about big dogs, I do think that there is a truth to what Amy's saying about we're going to be housing more challenging dogs. If we manage to divert most of the quote easier animals from the system. What does that look like in terms of shelter design?
Well, it's humbling to follow Amy because she is the expert, but I can share a few ideas of what we've been seeing and doing, working with our clients and working with many of them who've learned a lot from Dogs Playing for Life and other great inspiration in our business. First of all, I want to make the comment that, and I just got a new puppy and she just barked, so apologies. I want to make the comment that dog housing, I truly believe, is cultural. And what I say by that is that we're horribly influenced by really bad agriculture laws, all kinds of stuff in terms of the size of housing that we believe to be appropriate for a dog. And if you look at dog housing standards in Europe, for example, they tend to be larger housing units that allow for indoor-outdoor access for the dogs, and they're much bigger. And when we think about how we've been housing dogs for years, it's horrible. It doesn't allow for co-housing opportunities, like Amy mentioned. And sometimes it's not even good for that specific dog. And I'll give you an example of that. And that's the happy tail, which is not happy at all. And where a dog is in a housing unit and they hit their tail against the side of the wall and the tail bleeds because the housing unit is that small. It's horrible. And so the biggest thing that we're kind of talking about and trying to have a really good conversation about is that our preconceived notions of how we house dogs may be really fundamentally flawed in terms of what we provide that dog. And we sometimes even have better conversations around how to house animals in agriculture. Not that we've made tremendous progress, but at least we have conversations like, you know, the animal shouldn't touch the walls of the enclosure. So this is like a fundamental concept that we know we can apply to our dog friends as well. So having dog housing units that are larger and allow for different opportunities, enrichment in the housing, the animal to be able to express all the normal behavior, And indoor outdoor has certainly come back in full force, because that gives the dog so many more choices about how to go outside, inside, in the sun, not in the sun. And for shelters that don't have the perfection of being able to take the dogs out as much as we would love them to, it's best if they do. But if they can't, then having the dog be able to make a choice to eliminate outside as opposed to inside can be far less stressful for that particular dog. So shaking our sleeping selves and saying we have been undersizing dog housing for decades, and looking at how we can do a better job for dogs, particularly when they're behaviorally challenged, I think is a huge thing. So that was kind of a
Heather, why have we not been talking more about this? Because when you walk through, we've come to see these tiny little boxes as normal, but they're absurdly small. Do you think that there's just been resistance on the part of folks who have to pay for these things to say, no, we can't possibly consider this. This is as big as we can go?
Yeah, we architects, every day I look in my rearview mirror and I regret something every single day. And, when we know that dog housing is the biggest driver of square footage in a shelter, the biggest driver, and we know that it's also the biggest driver of costs, because we know that any good dog can dismantle anything given the opportunity to do so. So the housing needs to be really durable and safe. We know that as architects and designers, we are tempted to reduce those housing units to the size that our client deems acceptable, rather than pushing for them to be larger. And so we're really in a tough spot right now, because we know that the animals that are coming into shelters have greater and greater behavioral needs. We also know that it costs more and more to build shelters. And we know that dog housing is the driver of square footage and the driver of cost. So it's the issue. It's the issue. Our cat friends obviously require good housing, but they don't take up as much square footage, even when we house them really well. And the dogs take up a lot of square footage, and even pushing each housing unit up one foot in a lateral dimension has really big impact on the shelter size. So this is why all these support programs that is, preaching to the choir here, this is what Haas is all about. All these support programs, foster care, and other things that allow animals to be out of the shelter, then allows us to provide better housing within the shelter within the same budget. So this is why we're in such a tough spot. You started this conversation today with the people from South Carolina talking about the state of emergency. There is, we don't want to have these animals flooding back in, because then we who are designing these animal shelters will be tempted to make more small housing units again. So we've got to push back as hard as we can on all the programs and get these support programs so that the animals can have good housing within the shelter.
Well, I think that this gives us some hope for the future, that if we can successfully reduce the number of animals entering, that we can have housing that's much more adequate to maintain mental health. And I really appreciate you talking about European models of sheltering, because a lot of us probably need to go visit. Like, we need to see outside of what we know. Have you done that, Heather? Have you gotten to go to other countries and see how animals are housed? And has that been a valuable experience?
Well, I haven't gotten to do a European tour. That sounds amazing. And I'm sure there's a few people who'd love to sign up for that. We should do it together. But I will say that a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I decided to study dog housing standards across the globe. And what I learned is that nobody has as small a dog housing standard as we do in the United States. And then, of course, those dog housing standards vary based on the state you're in. And some of them being so small as to be, completely unacceptable. So I think that we have learned through just looking at dog housing standards throughout the globe without even having visited, that most people culturally imagine that a dog needs more space than we have in the past. And I think that, we also see Canadians giving more space to the dogs, so I think we can all challenge ourselves to, in North America, but in particular the United States, increase these housing standards a bit closer to some other countries.
Okay, so I'm kicking myself because Mike Wheeler, we are not going to get through everything that he has to share today, but if you're on the call, please stay with us because Mike really brings this all home with what he's just accomplished in Cabot, Arkansas. And so Bobby, I'm wondering if you can share the photos, and Mike, can you give us, we have more than 200 people here to show what happens when you re-envision your animal shelter. Mike, give us the rundown of what you've just done in Cabot.
I will try to make this quick. We, in Cabot, Arkansas, smaller community, less than 30,000 people, just so you understand. We did build a new shelter in 2006, so 15 years ago, but it was a shelter for housing animals. Over the last 2 years, we've, especially the last year and a half with Haas, we've learned and we've worked more toward a community focused, keeping families together. So on Tuesday, the citizens in our community have voted to approve a bond for us to build a new Cabot Animal Support Services Center. The biggest difference there is the shelter is a small piece of that. Instead of the entire 50,000+ square feet being a shelter, the shelter is a very small part of that. We will also have in there, we have a domestic violence private and secure boarding facility for victims of domestic violence to house their animals for them so they can get out of the situations they're in. A human food pantry. Once again, we're trying to bring the community together and provide for all the needs which ultimately affect us. We have a 5,000 square foot education center. We will have a public animal welfare and surgery education center. Education side of that being that our 4-bed surgery center will have an observation deck where we can bring in vet techs from 3 cities over from the college to come over and observe surgeries. We can bring in vets from vet schools and have them observe and then ultimately get on and learn surgeries. We're working on curriculum with the high school so that 2 years from now, they will have a veterinary services track in high school to where the students can come over, they can learn. And when they get out of high school, maybe they don't want to be a computer engineer or anything of that nature. A big part of this, we also, a big part of this is shelters, as we all know it, were put on the cheapest land, usually in a floodplain outside the city where nobody wants anything. You have to go a map to get there. We are buying and remodeling a vacant grocery store right in the heart of the Arts and Entertainment District in Cabot, Arkansas. So we are rerouting roads to make this on a major thoroughfares. 3 different roads we're rerouting so it goes right by the shelter. If you want any festivals or anything, our parking lot will hold upwards of 500 cars. And we are at the end of where 3 of our 4 biggest festivals in the city will come to. So we want everybody to know where we're at, but this helps with keeping our families together, our access to care. We all know Haas, or I'm sure we all know Haas here, those 11 elements, key in everything we've done for this. I could go on and on. In the past was 61%, and that's 15 years after we built another shelter in 2006. So it's just a matter of getting people out there. I will tell you, since we started this program just last March, when we started this drive to get this going, our donations have increased 434%. Okay. Why? Because we're not housing animals anymore. We're finding ways for this facility to benefit the community. Even those who aren't in the animal world can see the economic impact. For example, the study done by the University of Denver for Austin, Texas. I used that. So anyway, I got to quit talking. We're running out of time. I know
Like we need to, we're gonna have you hopefully come back and talk a little bit more about this. And you are amazing. And if you don't know this about Mike, he doesn't just oversee the animal shelter. What is your title, Mike?
I am the Director of Community Services. 12 years ago, started in the kennel, shoveling what we all know is in the kennels. 2012, become the Director of Animal Services. 2018, 17, somewhere around there, the city took over the senior services. So that fell in my lap. And then now we've built an entire construction services department, and that's mine as well. So whatever the city needs, I provide.
All right, to be continued next week. And next week, we also are we're gonna be talking about intake data, and it will make your head spin. There's no good news, but there is some light at the end of the tunnel. The shelter software companies are coming together to help us improve the way we think about animal intakes and the way we're actually able to figure out why the heck animals are coming into our system. So we will see you back here next Friday. Thank you to our incredible speakers. This was a call full of hope and a vision for the future, and that's exactly what we all need right now. So thank you for being here, and I can't wait to see you all back here next week. Have a great day.